What are we even talking about today? The history of work and the Great Resignation. Cool. I would watch that video, just saying. Hey guys, what's up? Thank you so much for joining me today. This is Philosophy. So today's video is going to be a brief recap on the history of work, and then we're going to delve into the Great Resignation, what's going on with that, and what it's all about. Let's get into it. A little dry in here. So we're going to get into the history of work, a brief history. All of the information that I am talking about in this video was found on Britannica.com. I'm going to link the exact webpage that I went to find all this information if you wanted to kind of read a little bit more in depth about it. So let's get started on the very basic beginnings of work. And this is, of course, the means to survive. So making sure that you have some shelter, food, clothing, and that your children are being taken care of. When humans were in a more primitive state, there was division of labor between the entire group to make sure that everyone was taken care of. Social cooperation was very big at this time because you really relied on other people, other groups, to make sure that you had enough food, had appropriate shelter, and also participated in things like hunting, gathering, and just kind of everyone came together. Back in these times, the majority of men did the hunting, where the women did the gathering and cooking, as well as child rearing. This is sort of the beginning of when we started to divide up work to make sure that we could survive. And once we kind of met those basic needs, we moved on to the next phase of work. This was a more specialized kind of work. This is when you see things like artwork, pottery, very specialized metal tools, which is called metallurgy. If I pronounce that wrong, call me out because I've never actually heard that word before, but I read it when I was doing my research. At this point as well, we began to figure out agriculture so that we could make a bunch of food in a smaller space and allowed us to settle in one place instead of migrating every season. After specialized work started to kind of appear, we move into the ancient world, and this is where you get large labor organizations. At this time, you get a big growth in population, and a lot of people are moving into the city, which require a lot of amenities and services to take care of these people. This is when you start to see things like class-divided work. People on the lower end of the class spectrum are working kind of the crappier jobs where they're laborers or just working in the streets. And then you get up to the higher class people who are working in organizations that control other people. At this point, you also start to get armies, which were originally used to protect the farmers that lived outside the city. These farmers were extremely important and crucial to the food supply of these ancient cities. So you're starting to get these kind of more city-like environments where you have class-divided work, you have people who are poor, and you're getting more into the division of class. Instead of everyone being in one community to make sure that everyone is taken care of, you're getting this kind of, let's call it the baby seed of capitalism, where the higher class you are, the more money you have, the more money you're going to get. And the less you have, you're probably going to stay at that kind of poor level baseline for a long time. Moving out of the ancient world, we're going to hop into the Roman Empire times. At this time, you have pretty much a group of people working in places called estates, which is like a big giant house with a bunch of other outbuildings. Sometimes, usually very wealthy people had estates. And this is where you see the beginnings of supervision type of roles. From what I read on Britannica, this is pretty much the beginning of a hierarchical structure of work, where you have a supervisor at the top or manager, and then you have people underneath who work and listen to that one person. This was in order to get a large number of people to kind of complete all the work that needed to be done and make sure that there was sort of a hierarchy of power. This is really the beginning of very structured jobs. This is also when slaves started to be included in work. And from what I read on the website, the beginning of slaves was really like prisoners of war, people who were criminals. They were used for slave labor. And of course, you have extremely poor working conditions at this time. And at this level on the hierarchy, if you're a slave, you're at the very, very bottom of that list. You don't really have any rights and you don't get paid anything. So this is sort of the beginning of that kind of structure. Now we're going to start moving further towards industrialization and what that did to the working conditions for employees and employers. With new technology comes more jobs and more demand, more trade, more disposable income. So you get these areas that are going through industrialization and really just bringing a lot of people into their cities. And when industrialization starts, this is when you see the government starting to give very big companies grants. I'm assuming because these companies are bringing a large amount of work for people who live in these areas. At this time, you start to see employees, like human employees, start to compete against machines that are basically made to take over their job and make it more efficient. Something I came across while doing my research is something called scientific management. This is also known as Taylorism. So scientific management looked at employees, human employees, as being similar or the same as machines. It looked at the relationship between an actual machine and people, and that it could increase efficiency in basically a 1-to-1 kind of ratio where you're looking at a person being able to operate the same way as a machine. Of course, this is not the way that things work because people need bathroom breaks, they need mental health breaks, they need not just repetition, but they need something that they're continually learning at and growing, where a machine just does the same thing over and over again, and you can really just let a machine run like 24/7 as long as it's taken care of. So there was a lot of pushback when this Taylorism type of scientific management thing came out, and this is where the union thing started. So this is when unions started to become popular and people wanted to push back on these companies to make sure that they had better rights and the ability to take breaks and get paid for the work that they did instead of just the amount of time that they were spending in the job. So basically machines made people work a lot harder, be extremely efficient, and not get paid anymore. So you have these big companies really benefiting from these workers being way more productive than before these machines and the scientific management came in, but they're not getting paid the equivalent of that increase in efficiency, which is of course still an issue today. Around this time, you start to see a few notes about this thing called the Hawthorne Effect. The very simplified version of this is basically when employees are consulted about their working conditions and just spoken to about how they would improve things or how they would like to see things, productivity almost always increases. And this is not tied to those conditions actually improving. Just the fact that employers are asking employees about how they feel and getting their feedback is enough to increase productivity. And of course, you have a lot of these shady, opportunistic companies really taking advantage of that and just basically asking their employees what they can improve upon and never acting on it because they knew that this Hawthorne effect was actually a thing. So you can see how humans have moved from just a very basic level of survival in terms of work into a more structured version where you have a very hierarchical system with somebody on the top, somebody below, somebody on the bottom, and you could go forever in a pyramid. I don't think some companies have really changed that kind of view. I think there's a lot of companies that have a CEO and then a million people in between, and then you have like the base level people, customer facing employees. So this is a ancient way of looking at work, and it's really unfortunate that we've come this far and we have so much amazing technology and we still haven't really improved widely on this structure. So this is going to lead me into a little bit about the Great Resignation. So I'm sure you guys have heard about this. It's all over the news. It's all over pretty much every social media website that you can find, and I've joined it. I mean, I did quit my job last week. So after reading a lot on Reddit's subreddit anti-work, I just got this kind of sensation that there were so many people out there that felt the same way that I did, where working in a job for however long just to pad someone else's pocket and make another company rich it just seems like a waste of time. So the whole basis of the Great Resignation is questioning what matters in your life. I think the pandemic really made people look into this in themselves in a lot more depth, and just trying to find meaning in your work and trying to find meaning and purpose in life has become almost at the forefront for a lot of people. There's also a lot of talk about these really low-paying jobs that became even more difficult to do during the pandemic. And a lot of these workers got a very slight bump in their pay, which was of course reduced as soon as the economy started to recover. A lot of this information I'm going to be sharing on the Great Resignation is based in the US, in the United States. So it's not super 100% relevant to the rest of the world, but I thought I would just focus on this because there's the most amount of data that I could find surrounding this movement. Also during the pandemic, you have a lot of people working from home and experiencing a ton of burnout, mental health issues, and stress. Especially if you were a parent and your kids could no longer go to school. Not only were you responsible for working from home, working longer hours, being on a ton of calls and things like that, but you also had to take care of your kids, make sure that they were getting their learning online if they were in a course like that, and also taking care of your household. So it was extremely stressful for the majority of people. And I think because of this, a lot of people are really reevaluating exactly what they want out of life and what they want from their workplace. So the biggest jump in resignations this year, 2021, that I could find was between the ages of 30 and 45. And it was up 20% from 2020. I think when you read a lot of stuff on the subreddit anti-work or you read a lot of articles, it's really focused around people who work in the very low paying jobs like in retail or the fast food service industry, things like that. But the actual biggest increase were people who had tenure from like 5 to 10 years. So people who were actually at these companies for quite a long period of time. The tech and healthcare industries experienced the biggest increase in resignations in 2021, about 3 to 5% more. So not a huge amount, but still pretty substantial, especially considering healthcare has kind of been at the forefront for the last couple of years. And the fact that these people are not being taken care of by their employers and the government is kind of disgusting. A study that I looked at from Visier said that 1 in 4 people in the US quit in 2021. In 2020, they said that about 18% of people resigned, and 2019 was 22%. So you can see it's up a little bit, not super substantially, but I'm glad that a lot of people are starting to get into this conversation about finding more meaningful work and a little bit more purpose in their lives. So just to summarize everything, I think it's really interesting to look at the history of work and how we've kind of gone through all these different stages to a place where it kind of feels like we haven't really evolved much. And I'm thinking or hoping that with this Great Resignation, we're in a place where some of that can possibly change. I'm hoping that with people looking for more meaningful work and better employers, that this will start to change the landscape of the job market completely. We should be looking at getting rid of a lot of these extremely low-paying jobs, and jobs that are dangerous should be paid a lot more than they are at the moment, like healthcare. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.